we go.
I'll go next then. My name is Johnny Harris. I've been contributing to WordPress for 8 or 9 years at this point. I'm a maintainer of the REST API, multi-site, and site health. And yeah, very keen to have this conversation today.
Nice to meet you, Johnny.
Dave, go next.
I'll go next. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dave. I'm based in England in the UK. I've worked with WordPress for a long time, but I've been contributing to Gutenberg itself for about 3 years. I've worked a lot on the nav block and the nav editor, and looking forward to today's conversation. I hope we can come up with some good results. Adam, I can see you next to me.
Sure. My name is Adam. I'm based in Wrocław, Poland. I've been using WordPress for plenty of years, but only contributing to Gutenberg for probably 18 months, a little bit more, maybe with a small break for data science adventure. I've been working on like core parts, data store parts like widget editor, and most recently nav editor. I'm looking forward to having a good chat today. Over to you, Andrei.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Andrei. I'm in Bucharest, Romania. Like Adam, I've been using WordPress for quite a while, but contributing for the past 3 years mostly to Gutenberg and sometimes to core. I've been with this navigation editor and navigation blog thing for the past year or so, and I'm quite excited that we've gathered so much interest and support from so much space in the community, in the project, and hopefully today we'll advance it even further. I'll pass it on to Paul.
My name is Paul. I'm from Oslo, Norway. I've been helping out with various features, design, testing for a bunch of years. First with WordPress core, and last few years focused a lot on Gutenberg. So, and I also run a WordPress tutorial website. And I also worked earlier as a teacher. So a lot of my focus is on the direct on the user. How would a simple user understand those features? Thank you. Let's see who's left. How about Matthias?
Hello. I'm Matthias. I'm from Montevideo, but currently living in Florence, Italy. I've been contributing to WordPress for 11 years or so now. Feels like a really long time. And I've been leading the Gutenberg project since we started a few years ago. I'll pass it over to Mike.
Howdy. I'm Mike, and I'm currently living in Kagawa, Japan, and I don't remember exactly how long I've been contributing to WordPress, but probably, I don't know. So for a while, many years now, and much of the focus has been on sort of the media team with a side of hosting. But I've been trying to get more connected with Gutenberg during this past year, and so I'm excited to be here and have the opportunity to help out and do a lot of listening. So thanks.
Great. And Amir, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hello, my name is Amir. I work at XWP, and I'm here with Jonathan Harris. And I'm learning Gutenberg, and I would like to see how is it all working. So I will track everything and be quiet for now. Thank you.
Great. I think that was everyone, right? Thanks everyone for those introductions. So to start with, I'm just going to kind of quickly go through and lay some groundwork, just give a brief recap of the navigation editor and block projects to date. So First thing I was going to say is that the navigation editor has gone through a lot of iteration. I think, Tammy, you were around at the start and you can probably remember what those original designs looked like, and it's now quite different to what it was. But I think it's always existed as a way to use the navigation block to edit menus. It was initiated as part of the same kind of initiative as the widgets project, which is now shipped in WordPress core. Yeah, so initially, like the navigation block and the editor were developed really by the same contributors, but more recently we've seen that kind of split really, I think. And the block has been developed with more of a full site editing mindset, I think it's fair to say, and the editor has somehow kind of organically moved towards just editing classic menus, and that's about like what we've focused on recently, I would say. And in the last hallway hangout, we kind of discussed ways that we can achieve feature parity with the classic menu editor. But after that, we were having some discussions on GitHub around whether it's a good idea to continue using the navigation block. And that's really where we came to this point where there's a bit of uncertainty, I would say. So it's a good idea to have this hallway hangout just to kind of try to clear up some of that uncertainty, try and find a way to move forwards. So now I think I'll talk through some of the goals of the navigation editor project, or what the goals have been. And one thing I would say is that I had a look online on GitHub for where these goals might be published, and it was really hard to actually find them. Oh, sorry, did I drop out there? Sounds like it's
No, you seemed
okay.
okay
I think
to
it
me.
was just on my end. Seems like
Okay.
worked fine for everyone
Carry
else.
on, Dan.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, I would say it was really hard to find goals online. So that's something that we can definitely get better at. And I think as an outcome of this meeting, it would be great to actually publish some goals, make them pretty clear for everyone working on the project. But originally, I think the main focus was to provide a better experience for users who are building menus. Also bring more flexibility in what those users can achieve via blocks. That might be more block types and maybe even third-party blocks. And there was also an outcome that because we're using the navigation block, there'd be kind of this symbiotic relationship between the block and the editor, and improvements to the block would benefit the editor and vice versa. Is there anything more that anyone kind of springs to anyone's mind that they want to add to that?
The only thing I was thinking of is that it's a good stepping stone or on-ramp to full site editing in a site editor context. So it's another place where blocks exist outside of the post editor. So it's a nice way for people to experience that, and as a nice way to segue towards full site editing if they choose to do so.
Yeah.
I would say it's also worth mentioning backwards compatibility as well. You wouldn't need full site editing to use this new editor. You would just be able to have a much nicer React-based interface for interacting with menus. Yeah,
definitely. So moving on to the main kind of discussion then, and I'd say in this part, I mean, we should try and kind of avoid coming up with solutions, because I mean, I think the meeting's just going to run for a very long time if we go into the solution space. So should try and focus on what like the requirements are really, what users need, and maybe even discuss some of the constraints that we have around what we're kind of proposing. So like one of the first places to start really is, so we had this kind of proposal to maybe introduce a classic menu block, because we were finding that the navigation editor had different requirements maybe to the block in its full site editing form. And that kind of sparks quite a big discussion around maybe changing the way the block works, maybe focusing more on making the navigation block reusable. So I thought it'd be good to start with what are the block's requirements for full site editing? Maybe if we can all get onto the same page in terms of that, then we can kind of understand how we might be able to make the navigation block work in the navigation editor. So I'll just kick it off. I'll say for the reason why we want to make the navigation block reusable is to provide a way for users to reuse the same menu data across their site. So use the same menu data in, say, their header and the footer of their site, pretty similar to the way that the menu system works right now. At the moment, a user would just have to kind of either copy or rebuild that menu from scratch, which isn't an ideal experience. And also, it kind of offers like a way that we might be able to migrate theme data, menu data when switching themes. But Matthias, you probably have a good viewpoint on this as well. Is there anything you wanted to add there?
Sure, I think it touches upon a bit on the, because when the separate classic navigation block was proposed, I think that was sort of the, to me, it was a sign of we were like all on the same page with regard to the initial goals. And I think it's important to emphasize, I think like you covered it already, but the idea of adding blocks to different places in the WordPress system is all part of the sort of phase 2 full site editing approach. It's just like on one extreme, we would have block themes that are entirely governed by blocks. And on other places, we would have regular classic themes that want to start using blocks in more places than just post content. So it offers different kinds of ramps for people to adopt certain features when they are ready and so on, which is an important part of the sort of the whole puzzle. I think for some time it was, I mean, it made sense in the way that the work was being split, but I think it was started to be perceived as like two entirely separate things, like classic navigation editing and the block-based themes stuff on the other hand. And in reality, it's like it should be a much more fluid spectrum. And I think what the impetus for having the classic navigation block, I think just highlighted some issues or lack of features in the actual block system for block themes themselves, like the ability to be able to reuse just the data structure of a menu in different, like in the header and footer, but be able to customize it differently. The ability to transform things, to import them, to support them on theme switches, to not be beholden to the template that holds all of that data. All of those things are just requirements in block themes themselves. So from my perspective, that wasn't enough of a reason for having like a classic navigation block, because like we were actually solving the same problem. It's just that the block theme state was sort of overly optimized for the sort of mega menus system where like data structure and presentation are a bit more blurred, which is a fine use case, but it should not be the use case that we optimize for. So with that in mind, I think the question is more about, we need to answer the question of what is the best way to store, operate, and interact with menu data in block themes. Like we should have at least a perspective and be on the same page with regard to what is the best way to have those. And from there, we should work out solutions for what does it mean for the current state of navigation? What does it mean for either migrating to new data structures, to like supporting them and so on? And I think in terms of user experiences, the answer is fairly simple, because the navigation screen is essentially an interface for manipulating the inner contents of the block that doesn't really care about the template container, which is the one that provides a lot of behaviors and presentation aspects, from font size, colors, to like whether the menu is responsive or not, like all of that stuff. If you remove all of that from the template and you just get with the data structure, that's essentially what the navigation editor screen is and what it was designed to do. So I think that's sort of the lay of the landscape from my perspective. The other thing that I would like to add is that like menus have been a thorn on the side of WordPress since their very inception. Like in the sense that is such an important need, and the user experience has never been great. So there's just value in improving that side of things, but also the way that they've been modeled, like it's one of the earliest structures added to WordPress when we moved from just listing page navigation to menus. And there's a lot of shortcomings. I don't know if like for the longest time, if you had, I don't know, more than 100 items, you wouldn't be able to save in some circumstances, because we would flood the post requests, because the way the navigation screen worked was really not very ergonomic. I think right now the way it works is we're essentially building a JSON object in an input with all the menu data, committing that, and then sort of reassembling that on the server to affect all the current data structures for the menu items, which is really like there's all sort of awkwardness in the way menus work. So I don't know if anyone has anything to add to the lay of things like we're standing before.
I just wanted to add about backwards compatibility. One of the key questions I want to understand here is, obviously in the new nav editor, I think we should maintain backwards compatibility where possible, because we're replacing the existing screen, and it would annoy a lot of users and break a lot of people's workflow if they, for example, have like an icon picker or a color picker for a menu item, and we break that would break people's websites. So that's not great. But possibly controversially, I don't think a lot of that backwards compatibility should be added on top of the full site editor. This is a new thing that we're creating. We don't need to add a bunch of, like, you're adding more overhead of backwards compatibility where we don't need it. So the reason why I was a proponent for having two separate blocks for this was because I don't want to gum up the navigation block that's using the full site editor with all this. I assume this is going to be horrific hacks and horrible stuff that we're going to have to do to make sure backwards compatibility works. I don't want that overhead on the full site editor. I want the navigation block to be as lean as possible in full site editing. Again, I don't know if that's a controversial view, about not adding that backwards compatibility, but that's how I feel on it.
Yeah. No, I think that's pretty reasonable. I think like my only caveat to that is that I think at the moment it was proposed, it was too early, because it was trying to circumvent problems that are already in like, it's not that the block theme version of the navigation menu is in a great place. So I think if we get that into a great place and we're still consider that it can work in both, we might see that, okay, actually the issues that are adding into this overhead of backwards compatibility are very few. Like there's not much into that. So I think from my perspective was just the timing was a bit too early to say, okay, let's split it into, it might be something that we can still do, because I think one thing that's still on the table is exactly what should happen with the classic navigation screen. Like when should we be forced, because there's so many, like the spectrum of modifications is really big, from themes that are not really doing anything special, no custom walkers or anything. Well, like those are the cases that I see that are more transferable between the two, especially if you look at the block theme data, just data structures. The ones that are doing custom walkers are a bit more tricky, but since we can do that mapping, there's not like, we can do that mapping to the APIs. I think we can take the effort to ensure those work well. The ones that get, I think, a bit more tricky are with, again, plugins that are really extending those screens. I don't know if we've done a lot of, if there's been like a lot of look into what plugins are doing, because I think
So I've done a bunch of that discovery. I've even got a ticket where I've listed off all the filters. I've installed probably the top 20 plugins, I would say, that modify navigation. And I've also been working with ACF, which obviously is a very big target for modifications and that they have the ability to add items, like you can add a color picker or whatever you want into into menu items. So I've been working both publicly and privately with ACF.
And just out of how does that interact with the customizer version of menus? Like, are most of those?
I'll be completely honest. Menus are a complete mess. Some people will modify the just the menu screen. Some will just modify the customizer. Some will modify both. There's no consistency to it either. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could rant for quite a long time about that, but I won't. But you can imagine.
I think
the one thing I would say is to maintain backwards compatibility, all of these filters need to use the old data structure because all of them rely on menu IDs, which are post objects in the database. So anywhere we have backwards compatibility, it's just going to have to use the old menu, the current data structure for menu items, which is why when you're saying, oh, let's just move everything to be blocks, and I'm like, but you're just going to make backwards compatibility just impossible at that point, because we can't just pass the dummy ID in, because you don't know whether someone's hooking into that, taking that ID to get the post object to do something. So if we pass dummy data into those filters, then those filters basically might as well not be there. So again, I think it's two different conversations. The classic editor has to have that old data structure. I'm not going to fight. This is not the same argument for full site editing, because it's a new thing, and we don't, as I said, we don't need that backwards compatibility necessarily.
I think there's something to be said for when we're getting into some of the styling and kind of maybe remove it for block styles. And I think when we're getting into some of that, so I think some of the like intensive styling, like mega menus comes to mind, and some of that we can maybe park to one side for some of the styling. But I do think there is a point where I kind of agree that there's just some functionality we should not put into the native block. I think there's just some added features where we've just got beyond. I don't know whether that's 2 blocks. I don't know whether that's additional. I don't know where that split is, but I do think we get to a point where it's just shouldn't take any more. And I think that the point at the moment is you can do that, and therefore we get this bad experience. And I think that's the problem. The moment you can create that bad experience, so we should, it's not that we shouldn't allow, but we should allow to create the best possible experience. And the moment you can allow to create the worst possible experience, if that makes sense, in the customizer. And I think that's the difference here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely clear that we would need, there's a portion of sites that would need nothing to change, like that we just cannot change anything, and that needs to continue to be supported. And we need to dial in exactly when those things kick in, when we detect if a plugin is adding custom fields or registering custom fields or manual. There are like many ways that we can, sort of similar to how we dealt with certain meta boxes that are doing things in sort of the regular post editor, where we sort of load the classic editor in its place. I think we would need to fine tune a lot of those tweaks, but I think in essence, what we need to really establish as soon as possible is what is the best representation for menus we can come up with for block themes, and then from there start working towards how can we reconcile, what sort of pathways are we going to offer for people. Some of these pathways might need to be theme opt-ins. Others might be like user related. I think there's a possibility for a user to say, because a lot of these plugins were sort of filling in the holes that Core was not providing, like a color picker for a menu or being able to add different things to menus. Like now Core is offering that. There should be a possibility for a user to see, oh, I want to like just let Core take over this place in my theme and just have a navigation run from there. There might be a possibility to offer that in some way. I don't know exactly how that might look, because it's like, that's the other tricky thing with theme support, is that we're essentially locking users to whether the theme supports that or not, and which in many cases that's the reasonable thing to do. but I think we can also think about okay, when it might make sense for a user to try and see if they want to go that way. But that gets a bit into the weeds. I don't want to.
I think that it's important to talk about the three scenarios that we've talked about here. The first scenario is someone's got a classic theme that doesn't have any theme opt-ins, and they want their existing data to be able to be saved and edited. So that needs to use legacy data, and we need to not do anything clever with that. There's this middle ground that we're talking about here, this on-ramp of using legacy data, but being able to put blocks into that, which I think is really interesting. I love the idea of being able to have like an icon or a search menu or something into that menu. And then there's full site editing. So there's three scenarios here. And yeah, like those three scenarios are really important to keep in your head. I'll be back in 1 second.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to discuss as well is that, so we have this idea of a reusable navigation block, and but that block is also going to have to work with classic menu data, because we've got a scenario where a user might switch themes from a classic theme to a full site editing theme, a block-based theme, and we'll need to be able to draw kind of classic data into that block in kind of a semantic way. So if the theme that's the menu that's in the location header location, that data ends up in the block that's in the header template. So yeah, I think it's worth saying that there is like a need for like a mechanism, like a backwards compatibility mechanism almost in the navigation block, regardless of what we do. But the question is, how far does that go?
Yeah, because if like presented that way, it's not even like it's mostly being able to import a menu, which is like in very broad strokes is the same as when Gutenberg was first introduced. It needed to be able to read classic content and transform it to blocks on demand. Like that need is sort of the same from that perspective. And it's one of the things that adds, I think there's a few explorations with the sort of using a location term in full site editing, which for block themes, it doesn't make sense because the location is explicit in the use of like whatever you place it on the template, that's your location. So using a location term is essentially a directive for how to import a menu, how to transfer it. We could figure out other ways, like that's not necessarily the, because we don't, I think it's already confusing people that they see the location, they feel like they need to add a location to their sort of block themes, where it's essentially only there to handle importing. We can probably find better ways of doing that don't sort of pollute the space.
Yeah. So is there an issue in migrating existing data? Because I built the REST API endpoints to get menu item data. Like you can take that in. Like is there an issue? I'm confused what you're saying about migration. Like surely that's possible now.
It's mostly imagine like a block theme adds like a navigation menu block in the header. Like if it doesn't say, okay, is there a location to this? There's no way for it to know which menu it should import from. Maybe there are 4 menus in the site. So there either has to be a UI where the user chooses that, there has to be a way for a theme to declare, again, a location that just maps and makes that implicit. But again, like outside of the convention of using like primary, secondary, like WordPress doesn't really have a semantic for location. It's mostly a convention. So it's not necessary, like it could just be that the import, again, just needs to be a user choice. But the problem is that a block theme, we need to figure out when that importing process happens. Because if you install a block theme and you don't go to the site editor, or you don't interact with the site at all, what does the front end show? What does that navigation block render? Would it have a fallback? Would it try to use a menu that's registered? Would it assume there's a primary menu? Like there's a lot of assumptions there that The location was a way for the block theme to say, my assumption is that if there's a primary menu, use that to render. The moment the user interacts with the navigation, we do the importing. I think that was the sort of the scope of how that was working so far.
But I feel like this is almost an
still
impossible problem to solve, right? Because at the moment, existing themes, if I switch from one theme to another theme and it's differently named and somebody called it header one and it's top header in a different one, we still can't map that. It feels you're describing a massive problem that already exists, and I'm going to ask the question: is this even in scope of what we're trying to solve it? Like, how, like, is this a problem? Like,
it's not necessarily something we need to solve, but we need to think about the experience of a user enabling a theme, and then they go to the front end, and what happens? Like, that needs to, like, the block needs to define whether it's going to render a fallback, whether it's going to try to render top level pages. It needs to make a decision, and whether that decision needs to take into account existing menus or not, I think that's something to be defined. I wouldn't consider it a blocker, but I think in terms of the in terms of the experience, there's probably some stuff that we can do to improve the
isn't there a reasonable expectation that they would preview the front end after changing the theme? Who's this person that's like, I'm going to change the entire look of my website and I'm going to go get a coffee and not bother to check it?
Reckless user doesn't worry about their site. Yeah, it's only a problem if
just a maverick who lives by his own rules.
Yeah, well, maybe that happens a lot though, doesn't it? This probably only occurs, right, if we're changing from a classic theme to a block theme, right? So I was thinking as well when you were saying, Johnny,
it's still there between block themes though. Like if you switch from one block theme to another, and that block theme has a couple places for navigation. Again, are they all using the same source or different? Like, it's still a question there how those things map.
Yeah, there's a problem.
So we need to put some thought into there. Yeah.
So we also need, like people will may switch from full site editing themes back to classic themes. They might switch to themes that support blocks in navigation. Yeah. Like, there's all these weird combinations that people might do. There's also use cases where people have, like, I think Jetpack used to do this, that they used to give you like a mobile theme if it detected the device that was coming to you was. So there's cases where you'd have one site, but it actually have multiple themes depending on the user as well. So we need to think about those use cases as well.
Yeah, there's no doing that anymore, I think, but.
Yeah, because that's absolutely insane. I don't even know why they did that. Like, do that. It was before responsive design was a thing. I can only assume.
Now,
yeah. What
so, like, people might still be doing stuff like that.
I mean, the fallback in old theme times was like show all the pages, which also breaks things, right? If a navigation shows all the pages and someone has 200 pages. That instantly becomes a problem, right?
Yeah, well, it's like navigation is something that's so crucial to the site design that that's one of the challenges, even in some of the patterns that, like, Yo and you've been working on and so on. There are some designs where you cannot map an existing menu because it breaks. Like if the design has this, I don't know, like the 4 corners where you have like a menu item here, a menu item there, and then at the bottom it's just like the 4 corners. You're expecting just to have 4 items. Like there's no way you can have more root items without breaking the design, and that needs to have a different flow for the user. They should be able to, I don't know, load the pattern and be able to pick, I want this page for here, that page for there, and so on. It's hard to virtually point to the corners. You get the idea.
You do wonder if that's actually the same thing, a menu. Like maybe it's just 4 links in the 4 corners of the screen. And that's it. Because you cannot use it as a menu. Like for instance, you cannot check automatically add pages if you only have 4 corners of the screen. Because the moment you add a new page,
it's still like you still want if the page is updated, you want the title to be updated. If the links changes, you don't want it to be like hard-coded links. You want them to be actual menu items. And
Yeah,
and to inherit all the benefits that come with that.
Yeah, definitely. I've come at this purely from the block side. How can we enable a variety of great designs? Because as is the case with navigation, it is perhaps the most important visual design of any web page. And usually the entire design is centered around how do you navigate around these things? And then we figure out the content, put it in this box in the middle. And so in order to enable this variety of designs across the web, we really need to kind of push the limits. And as Matthias says, there is this pattern that is based on 4 menu items. You can't add 5. It looks wrong if there's 3. And maybe this pattern isn't for you because it's very highly opinionated, but it's still something we need to be able to accommodate. And so it's definitely a challenge from that point as well.
Yeah, there's also a issue with like migrating the like what we were discussing, classic menus to block-based menus. You cannot migrate all the possible combinations, right? Like maybe I have a search field that's enabled by a custom worker or a custom field or a plugin. How that come over? Right? Like there will always be a certain portion of menus that when you switch from a classic theme to a block-based theme, like some of that will be lost inevitably. And I don't think there's anything that can be done about that. So how this experience should be even wrapped for the user.
This is where I kind of lean, I go to block styles, and maybe this is where the connection, I don't know, I'm trying not to solution engineer very rapidly, where block styles maybe turn some features off, to be honest. And I think that's pretty opinionated, but that gives a good user experience. Don't show me things I can't do with that style, because if I can't do them, why are you showing me them? That's the basic functionality here, and that is quite something to decide to do. But I think that some of these designs are going to be needed for navigation. That's half the problem. Trying to solve everybody's problem with one thing with navigation doesn't work, but one thing that adapts depending on the style is a different conversation. So it's changing, like the thing that adapts depending on what it's being used for is a different conversation to one thing that does everything all the time.
One thing we'll definitely need regarding backwards compatibility is a path for developers that have built some massively custom thing, add an extra field or something like that. What we need some handbook documentation to be like, right, you build it this weird janky way in the past, this is how you should build it in the future. It will work in our new Shiny editor, and it will work in full site editing as well, and have a real clear path out of where they're at. Because if we don't give that to them and we're like, yeah, by the way, we just came in and broke all your stuff that you just plug in that you spent years developing, we're not going to give you a path out of it, that's going to make a lot of people mad. And I think, yeah, like block styles and all these amazing tools we have with blocks are so much better than like adding this janky field and having to enqueue JavaScript and all this stuff. Like there's so many of that stuff you just get for free, like color pickers and that sort of stuff with block styles and stuff like that. So yeah, again, I think that needs to be one of our key goals is here of how do we, yeah, for those people that need to customize it, how do we help them to do that?
Yep. So one of the things I wanted to discuss next is we've got this kind of understanding of where the future of the navigation block is going for full site editing. And we've got an understanding now of where the navigation editor is, where we focused mostly on kind of editing classic menus. And so with like WordPress 5.9 coming up, I wanted to kind of discuss the short-term goals. And like for me, one of the things I realize is that maybe these two visions that we have discussed aren't really that compatible. So I think we need to kind of figure out where we go forwards and how we can deliver really good value in WordPress 5.9. So it'd be good to touch upon that. Because I just see this like reusable navigation block, and the way we've built the navigation editor isn't really with that in mind. So
I think there's a few things there. I think the most important right now in terms of pricing is that we need to ensure that for block themes, navigations are working in what we think is the best possible way. I think that has to be the top priority because it's the most, like that's a blocker for rolling out block themes in 5.9. I think we have more space to say, we don't think we're ready to replace the classic navigation screen with a block interface just yet, and we might want to do that in a subsequent release. Using everything we're learning from the block theme situation, I think that's a possibility. We don't think we can get there sooner, because again the things we need to take into account for replacing an existing screen are a lot more, and it's almost infinite. Like, you've been through this with the widget screen. Like, it's something that will take also multiple iterations to really cover it properly. So it's not something we need to rush by any means. I don't think we need to. And also while we can say that, yes, like having a more pleasant, more consistent experience for editing menus can bring a ton of value for existing users. Like, again, those users had been with those screens for years. It's not that like any change is going to be initially disruptive to them anyway. So it's not something that that we have to rush. But I think it's important that we figure out how we want to store navigation menu blocks in block themes, how these flows sort of work, because we're going to have situations of going from block themes back to classic. How does that work? And we just route everything through the regular navigation APIs, even if they are stored differently and so on. Like, all of those things we need to have some answer to. I think one thing that I do want to ensure that we don't get, because that we don't fall into the trap of like the infinitely customizable mega menu situation, where you have like not just navigation items, but you have paragraphs and images and submenus. Like, that's a cool use cases that can get unlocked, but it should not be. It might be something that we sort of chip away at in subsequent releases. I think we should identify sort of the 70–80% of most common use cases, which is, again, not those intense situations that mix both the presentation and even the four corners case is a bit of a niche one in the sense that it's very constrained. It's a very design opinionated way. I think we should take it into account from the perspective of designing something that's ergonomic. But it might be a case where, like, again, the flow of switching to such a theme, it will require the user to take more steps. There's no way we can automatically make assumptions there. So we would need to figure out a flow that, okay, if you enable this theme, there might be, it might have to happen in stages. And that's true for like many block themes, to be fair. Like, I think the idea that switching a theme is just an activate thing away, I think is going to start to get challenged, because there might be cases where you want to retain your header template part, you just want to switch other templates, or you only want to switch the styles. Like, there are going to be like many more possibilities of mixing things. All of that needs to be worked on, mapped on. Like, it's something that we're going to also iteratively approach. So to me right now, the biggest thing is, how are we going to store navigation blocks in the context of block themes, defining all of those pieces well to the point that we think this is the best way, that it also solves many of the shortcomings that menu items have had for ages in their current data structures and so on. So for 5.9, that should, like, to me, that should be the, at least it's the biggest blocker. And if we overcome that, I think we can look at the other, prioritize the other items based on how ready we think. Like, we might be able to split some of that work as well.
Can I add something, please? I think about Elementor as one very successful full site editor builder, and I had some experience with it that was very user friendly. It helped me a lot, and it was very easy to switch from one theme to another. You can use, I can call it like blocks. They have their own blocks, and maybe it is not bad idea to look from their experience, because people are used to using Elementor, and maybe such approach could be useful. That's.
Is there an Elementor product that's available for free, or would that experience require you to sign up and pay, as it were?
You have Elementor. There is free Elementor, and you have Pro.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I think with the Elementor, they can guarantee what is what, and that's the difference. So they can guarantee this thing is called this thing, and this thing can be called this thing if it's an Elementor theme a little bit more. And I think that's where maybe the branching is, and maybe the complexity of our problem might be. I would love to dig into that more, but I think that that's maybe the difference between the problems. So they have a little bit more dependency generally in frameworks between what things are what and where they relate. So when you switch, you know where things are, and you can rely on what they're called a little bit more. And that's the problem. We don't know what something is when you switch. So we don't know what a menu is called. We don't know what anything's called when we switch. So that's where our kind of.
They reuse
they have any
navigation.
Do they have any
is...
flows, like migrating flows from classic menus to Elementor theme? I just wonder.
No.
All right.
No, I just found it. I will share it with you. This is how you create navigation. So you create basic navigation, and then you can style it and give it whatever you want. You have everything that you need from WordPress, and then you put another layer above it, and you style it and do amazing things with it. So I think that by checking this could be helpful in deciding what is good approach, because they have millions of installations and people are used to using that. So because I worked for 4 years before on a number of websites in one very crowded agency, and on hundreds of websites I was working with all sorts of builders, and it was very interesting to check how Elementor is working, because you have one team, and then when you enable Elementor, you go to another view that is totally different. You have pages, you have navigation, you have everything that you have there, but you are moving on the layer above, and you don't have anything with the widgets and whatever there is that is other team providing. So it is interesting to check on that.
Yeah, I think it was like very early on in the very initial explorations of the navigation menu block. A lot of these page builders were explored, even some other like non-WordPress based ones as well. Because there's always a lot to learn from all those approaches. I think that the one thing with Elementor is that like the separation there between how you style the menu and the menu data is sort of like similar to what we have been discussing at this stage. I think so far the navigation block has been more focused on the interactions of adding like the individual items, reordering them, dealing with nested structures and so on, which is more the equivalent to the navigation screen. And sort of the navigation container, I think, is the one that's most similar to the Elementor one, the one that handles how does it collapse on mobile, how does it look, and so on.
I think that's a good perspective. The block itself is what's adding the styling, and what we've been dealing with is actually creating the data so far. So how do we create that menu structure? And now we're at the stage where we wonder, how do we store it so it's becoming reusable? And then once we've made it reusable, we can improve that container which retrieves the data to to style it and add all kinds of functionality. And
I feel like I want to repeat with the same words, but the block styles, if we could maybe ship some of those, I think that also helps. Just having a few variations instantly lifts the block as well to show what is possible, and just enhances it and shows that you don't need all of that extra functionality and all of those extra things as well. I think just these predefined presets of good that you can just click and they happen, that takes beyond just, most people just want that and they aren't going to need all of this kind of macro controls that they currently have to do those things.
Yep.
Just want to throw something out there that I put on GitHub a few times, but it's worth mentioning. So the existing menu data is stored in terms and in post objects, right? So you have a menu, that's a term of Johnny's menu, and then you have a bunch of posts for each item. Now, what's nice about that is a term has a description field and a post has a post content field, which means we can store block data in those fields. So we could use existing data structures, but then for the container, whack it in the term description, and for each menu item, you could store block data. And in that way, you could actually have a backwards and forwards compatible menu data structure. And that would mean, say tomorrow we add a new editor and we click save, and we save it in both formats. We save it in the current format it needs to be in and in a block. And that would mean that if you moved to a block-based theme, it would already be in block data and you wouldn't have to do any migration. You'd already have that data in the right format. That could be a really cool way to maintain backwards compatibility.
That's good. That's how Elementor, I think, works. And good approach.
I don't think Elementor changes any of the data, right?
No, you have menu in the navigation. There are all menus there. I shared one link here, and you can see in chat, and you can see how they are creating. So first do.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still like like the navigation is stored exactly in the way that WordPress stores it.
Yes,
it's not changing anything. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing that we need to also be open to challenge, because the way that WordPress currently stores navigation is not the most ergonomic. Like it has led to many problems where each menu item is its own post type. And the WP term is essentially functioning like a block tree provider because it's giving you the relationship between the items. So there's also advantages in consolidating, again, how we represent these sort of relational trees, which is, it's almost exactly the same, just like from slightly different perspectives. I think
for the record, I'm not defending the existing data structure. I understand it may have its limitations. I'm just trying to maintain backwards compatibility.
Yeah. But I think this is one where we should really put the different trade-offs like very clearly. I think we should do that exploration with the WP term using it's a bit awkward to use the description field to store like the block tree data, like semantically, it feels a bit awkward.
But that's basically all we did for widgets. We did the same thing for widgets as well.
Yes, yeah. But I think we should see how far we go, and whether there's value in just having its own custom post type for navigation, where it's really just the tree. We could even just store it in JSON. We don't need to serialize it as HTML because it's essentially just the HTML comment boundaries. And if we do that, like, because I think we should keep in mind that the way that navigations are saved now, they go through this transport layer already. So if we can start skipping some of those structures, it might even, I think there's also some performance issues with like if you really have like a ton of menu items, that some people just circumvent that by not using that data structure. So I think that there's some things there that we might see as sort of also worth upgrading. but I think we need to be detailed about like the different trade-offs.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think we should try and fix performance problems in menu items. Like I'm speaking as someone who wrote a plugin to cache menu items. Like it's like advanced nav cache. Anyone who wants it's on GitHub. Yeah, menu items can suck, and I'm not defending that, but it needs to be in that format for backwards compatibility reasons. And it would be nice if we had forwards and backwards compatibility so that you could easily switch between themes and without any sort of need to migrate it. If it was already cached in term descriptions and the post content, then it makes less migration needed.
But
Yeah, I think it's.
Go
ahead.
We would introduce a new paradigm around block storage and how that specific thing works. And I don't know, maybe there's some caveats there. Like it does provide forward compatibility, storing blocks in some free-form text fields because we can do it, but the question is whether we should do it, because it's just introducing a new way of storing blocks kind of all over the place. And yeah, I just wanted to add that as a thing that could, potentially backfire in the future.
There's a part that I can't quite get my head around as well, which is if we're saving both like block data in one place and classic menu data as well at the same time, then if you're using a block-based interface, that block-based interface has to support all those backwards compatibility points, like, plugins that might extend the classic editor as well, because otherwise you won't be able to save like, a color picker, in your
I mean you might need
block data.
Yeah, you might need to map the notion of custom fields to block attributes in different ways, and you would need to do it in a way that even other clients are able to do that. I'm thinking of like the mobile apps. They wouldn't, like, depending on where we build the abstractions, like if there's too many responsibilities on the client to ensure that you're sort of saving the same data twice, which is essentially what would be going on. And that can be risky from the perspective of ensuring that that data is always in sync, because there can always be a plugin that just manipulates the database content for menu items directly and doesn't understand blocks at all. And you would go out of sync and then you wouldn't know how to reconcile that. So it's similar to the problem with I think there were originally some suggestions of storing block data as JSON in a post meta field and keeping the content separately, but it's the same. Like the moment you split data in two, you can ensure that your client understands how to save into two, but you cannot ensure that other clients, like, I don't know, Mars Edit or whatever, like things that used to exist that interact with WordPress, or Ulysses app that saves, like you cannot ensure that all of those applications know that they need to now save things into places. So you would need to build all of that server side and that might get out of hand at some point to ensure that you're able to do all of that. It's not like for a subset of the problems just on navigations, it might still be worth seeing what those boundaries are, because it's not, you're not solving it in an arbitrary problem, but you would need to discriminate the cases where if you start adding content to the navigation block that is not navigation items, like a paragraph, a heading, like to build those mega menus. At that point, there's no reasonable way to map that to. So you would need to, at that point, split it into its own, like it would no longer be data that is kept in sync. And that might create so many variations and edge cases that it might not be worth just to try to keep the backwards forwards compatibility. And it might be worth like doing that in a separate layer where we can, again, test better, like set the confinements better and so on.
I think going back to like priorities as well, I mean, this discussion is already sounding like very technically complex, and it doesn't sound like something we can achieve like realistically for 5.9. So like, you know, maybe for a future version of WordPress, but like we're kind of in a difficult position now really where like we don't want to back ourselves into a corner where we can't support like any backwards compatibility, but at the same time we have to think about you know, what is our most immediate priority really. And
isn't the priority to get the experimental flag out and get people to start using this in the Gutenberg plugin? That, to me, that's what I'm working towards. And I've created a bunch of tickets where I feel like there's a few things that we need to do to make sure that it has feature parity with the existing editor. That, like, if you had Gutenberg and you were a madman, you're running Gutenberg in production, and you turn this on, it's like, oh crap, now I can't edit the menus anymore because custom post type archive links don't work anymore. They're not represented. Like, that's a few of those things are like complete blockers, because I turned it on my site and I'm like, oh, okay, there's a few menu, like few menus just I can't see anymore. They just won't ever work. Like, mapping out what an MVP of that editor looks like so we can get it out experimental, and getting this in people's hands as quickly as possible, and trying to avoid what happened with the widget editor where we didn't get enough feedback on it, and you know, we're getting people testing it at the last minute and getting bug reports, and that's just for 2 weeks before the launch of getting that out. Yeah, I just want to get this out and out experimental, because I don't think people even know about it because it's hidden under behind experimental flag at the moment. But that's probably intentional because we were still working on it. But I want it to be center stage.
Yeah, yeah, and even the scale of testing with it outside of experimental is a tiny portion of WordPress sites. Even if you're running like the Gutenberg plugin, I think it's like 300K or so. Like, it's a tiny portion of people. Like, anyway, so it's difficult to get, like with widgets, it was difficult to get like a broad enough testing. But I think in terms of priorities and order, I think defining how we want to store block themes, because those, like, again, 2022, the theme is going to be using this. We need to ensure that that's in a good place. I think step 2 for me would be if we have an isolated template editor just for the inner structure. That would allow us to say, okay, you were using a block theme, now you switch to a class and you can still continue to edit the menu because we're doing all the mapping to the walker. If you have like a more complex menu where it's using custom fields or whatever, or you have a plugin or whatever, like, we would load the classic environment. Think those in that order, and then, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like this bit, I interrupted you, but I should have been quiet because you're talking about priorities. I can come back to it. So go ahead.
Yes, in terms of order, like, I think to me the thing that's still a bit up in the air is whether the dedicated navigation screen is something we should first, like UX-wise, replace with an isolated template bar editor, if that makes sense UX-wise. If that does, which is something that block themes also benefit today from that experience, we need to figure out what are the steps to bring this to all the long tail of classic themes. And that's
will there be
that
users that want to edit menus in a separate screen, because editing 200 menu items in full site editing will be just like, it sounds like painful. Like, it panics me even talking about it, you know?
And that's what an isolated template editor will do, I suppose.
Yeah, that's one of the points for the isolated template bar, is that there would be cases like, again, there are a myriad cases. It might even be related to user roles and capabilities, and maybe like you only want these template parts to be accessed by this user role in a isolated way. Like, there are like many possible configurations, even in block themes, where that might make sense. It doesn't remove the need that if you just have your own personal site, it's very simple with 3 menu items, it makes sense to have everyone in the same screen. Like, there's no need to overcomplicate that. But the flexibility afforded by the isolated template bar editor, I think is super useful. I think it will be useful as well if we start mapping something we haven't done, for example, is importing widget areas into template parts for block themes. That's also an avenue that we need to be exploring. And at that point, an isolated template part editor for a sidebar is essentially equivalent to what the widget editor was trying to do, just in a more ergonomic way, because now you could have like a faithful preview within the isolated template part as well. But those are the things that I think we're like, we shouldn't be looking at it as there's room for doing that incrementally. Like we still haven't like forced people to upgrade, I don't know, classic content to block content in posts. I think those are flows that we need to get to. We need to start offering more options there. The same for widgets to template parts. There's a lot of ramps that we need to design.
I think the key here is that the thing that Johnny mentioned, whether we want to focus on removing that experimental label. And I think that made sense when our goal was to land in 5.9, a block editor for classic menu themes. And it made sense to focus on removing that experimental label so that we can, make this block editor for classic menus available to a wider audience, collect feedback and whatnot. But the thing is that if you're going at it from the opposite end, in terms of let's make the navigation block the best it can be for block themes and solve all the problems there, and then see how this polished navigation block interacts with classic menus, and then see how we can bring that to a standalone editor, and then see how people with classic themes adopt this new path. Then on this new journey that we're taking, removing the experimental label from a project which is basically a block editor for classic menus, it's not at least not a priority now, because we're looking at the exact opposite end of where we were trying to go. So now we just move camp there and try to make our way back to where we were.
So does that mean effectively that the editor's on hold until the navigation block is kind of in a firmer state, in a shipped state?
Yeah, I think that's a good. I think we might get there like very fast, because I think the biggest blocker is Dan's sort of exploratory PR and making some of these, because once we have that, we can introduce the isolated template part, and that might already like unlock that. We need to see. But I think that's been the biggest struggle with the whole project, is been that the two things are correct. We want to do the two things, but I think we advance enough on the classic navigation screen to the point where it started to diverge from the block theme case. And that I think we need to bring it back a bit again to see if that's still a viable path. And if we run again into that sort of situation, we might still need to go back to, okay, we need a classic navigation block thing, and that might be simpler still in the end for classic themes. Having just a separate classic navigation block.
Can
I think that cannot be answered just yet. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think all of us were jumping with enthusiasm trying to speak then, which is awesome. From an experience point of view, I worry about taking the experimental flag off of that isolated editor, whatever we're calling it. I like isolated editor because I want to isolate it because of the experience currently. I've made quite a few issues, and that's because we're trying to do so much of it, right? And because we're trying to fit things, and because we're trying to do things, and it just doesn't quite work in places, and it doesn't quite fit. Clunky is the word I'm going to use, and crotchety. It's not quite there. There's some edges to it. I like the idea of trying to make a best-in-class like block. If 2022 is going to use a navigation block, that's essential that it does it. What I would not like the idea is that 2022 is beholden to that editor that whenever I test it, I find a new experience or a new bug, if that makes sense. So that would be my huge concern, that 2022 would be super let down. That's nobody's fault. It's just because we're trying to do so much, and everyone's awesome, but they don't have time machines.
I think it's like 2022 should not be using that screen. Like 2022 should be using the blog directly. And but from there, we might see like if even in 2022, the isolated template part, focus mode, whatever, we're terrible at naming sometimes. It can still be super useful for people and give us a sense of how we bridge from that focus template part in 2022 to the classic themes situation.
Let's just add some background. So the explorations that we've been doing is like, where do we store navigation block data if we want to make it reusable? And the first thing we were looking at is the template part system. I started looking at that in a PR. Johnny proposed like terms. So there are a few options there. And but the idea of like, you know, if you have like template parts already have this concept of being able to edit a template part in isolation. So the idea is that the navigation block would be able to take advantage of that as well if it's using a template part to store data. So did you want to add something?
No, just quickly, that I think also from the perspective of block themes, it's not that relevant whether it uses the WP term or the template part, because both of those approaches already decouple the template presentation from the data. So for block themes, that's the biggest thing. I think we could even switch from one to the other, like we can manage that thing. Like it's because for block themes, it's kind of irrelevant. I think the important thing is to be able to consider the contents of navigation, something that you can grab and you don't need to just rely on the template that holds it. I think that's the biggest structural change for block themes and the thing that we need to get through as fast as we can. Because I think that's also the thing that we sort of all came to the conclusion that that's a good thing for block themes regardless. And the actual details of the storage mechanism, I think those can be tweaked and even changed if we need to, because we control that. It doesn't change anything it's an implementation detail from a block theme perspective.
Yeah. My worry though is that if we're super serving full site editing, like is this navigation editors can get lost in the mix? Like it feels like we're going, to me it makes sense to go forward, like change existing menus and then work towards it. But I understand like navigation is part of full site editing, so we don't want to block that. But there's been a lot of work put into this navigation area. I really think it's worthwhile. It's such a better experience already. The stuff we've done around batching REST API requests fixes a lot of those problems that you were mentioning about 200 menu items and all that sort of stuff. I just don't want this navigation editor to get lost in the mix, because I do think it is worthwhile, even if it is edit existing menu data. This is worth doing.
Yeah, the thing there is, and I'll try to avoid describing how the thing works internally, but what we're doing now is basically pulling some data from the API related to menus, and then we're building client side a block representation of that. And then we pretend that there are some blocks there. And then when we save, we basically deconstruct those blocks back into data that we send back to the API. And the thing that we're trying to achieve for enabling block-based themes, which is reusable navigation data, this particular thing might just show us the way, so to speak, because we'll need to figure out how do we store that data? Where is it going to be stored? How do we access it? And by doing that, we might come to a better architecture for editing classic menus themselves, because you could see a correspondence between how classic menus are represented as trees of stuff and how block menus are represented as trees of stuff. And when you decouple that from the block itself and you store it somewhere else, then maybe suddenly the block just becomes able to work with classic menu data without all this work, which is now specific to this navigation editor, and it's not used anywhere else, which is all kind of, you know, magic being done with data. Maybe this can be solved by itself by improving the navigation block, and then we can come back to editing classic menus with a better tool set and a more well-laid architecture. And I still do think, as you said, that it's a worthwhile project, and bringing block interfaces to classic themes and classic environments is still something that we want to do. I think we should do it in a way in which we can benefit.
And my hope there also is that if we solve these last remaining details on the block theme context, I think we can still consider like allowing people to create menus using this interface on classic themes. Like it wouldn't take over. We would allow like creating a new theme, importing from an existing one if you don't want to start from scratch and so on. But it's still, there's still like, we still maintain a bit of a separation. We don't assume that it will be able to replace all the cases. It would be, if you want to start using these, it's possible, and we do the routing to the WP-nav menu functions and Walker and so on, just for the simple cases. I think that could be a reasonable thing we can still do in 5.9, depending on how well it goes, what we do now with block themes.
I just shared
related. Sorry. Also related to what Johnny mentioned in terms of amount of work that already went into the project. A lot of this work is building out the API functionality around menus. And I think this is going to still be a focus thing for block theme navigation, because if you think about theme switching and the fact that we want to preserve navigation when we can, then we will need those API endpoints to work, even if it's just for migrating data. But as long as we'll give users possibilities to preserve their navigation between themes, then those API endpoints are highly needed. I don't see any other way to do it from the block world. Go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
I just shared one URL for a theme created in Elementor. Accidentally I bought it. I didn't plan to bought it, but by accident I bought it. I wanted to buy one complete theme, but this is template kit, and it is a group of building blocks that I can use to create theme. And that was the way I learned Elementor. I didn't use it before. I use it in complete themes that were building blocks where I use everything. But this way, I needed to install Elementor that is builder for that, and then I imported all those blocks or template kits from this. And then I could arrange him. This is my header. This is my footer. This is whatever. This is element for widget. This is whatever I wanted. So when I think about blocks in Gutenberg as a building blocks, I look at them from this perspective, and I think that's great. That's really great to have those building blocks that I can reuse. And if I create it for one project, I can export them and use it later for some other projects. So, and I think that is good perspective, business perspective for WordPress, and everyone would have interest to create new building blocks to sell, to create plugins for that, for whatever. So that's just what I wanted to share. Sorry for interruption.
That's actually awesome.
Yeah, I think like it's worth looking into kind of what's happening with patterns on WordPress, because I think it's quite a lot of similarities there. So yeah, but I just wanted to kind of mention now we've gone quite a bit over time. So is this a good place for everyone to wrap up? I think there was still one point I wanted to discuss, but let's just have it in mind rather than actually discussing it now. But it's the case of like the theme opt-in to, the theme might opt-in, a classic theme might opt-in to receiving kind of block-based navigation menus. So it's not a fully block-based theme, but it's a theme opt-in. So just kind of worth thinking about how that might work as well, because that was one of the other cases that Johnny mentioned. But yeah, for now, let's.
I think everyone here is on board with that. I don't think anyone's against that. So I think we can just rubber stamp that as a good idea.
Yeah, definitely.
But how we implement it is going to be, have to be a theme opt-in, because you can't just shove a search form in a menu item. It'll probably just look rubbish. And so it'll have to be an opt-in so that developers can put CSS behind it, basically.
It also does sound like the subject for a new hallway hangout on
Yeah.
its own.
We can speak about that for several hours as well.
Cool. Well, hopefully this was useful for everyone. I really appreciate everyone lending their time to this. It was very valuable for me, at least. So thanks everyone for attending. Yeah.
Thank you for setting it up. I think like the only thing it would be good to ensure that the discussion that continues on the issues, because I think one problem has been that it's been so scattered that it's been hard for people to again get up to speed at exactly what's going on across, especially given that it was sort of like two separate projects for a while, navigation screen and the navigation block. Just like anything we can do to improve
we've talked about comms a little bit on our shared channel, and there's some talk of having a meeting. I know it doesn't work out with a lot of people's time zones, but at the very least, maybe some sort of weekly or bi-weekly update with links to those discussions, because as you say, it's so scattered, and I'm part of this, and I'm struggling to like find out where all the conversations are. So just a blog post which like here are all the discussions and all the links, that would be friggin' amazing. I think even for people that work on this project, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So just to summarize, I think like next steps, we should set some proper goals now, like imagine what the goals are for 5.9 and onwards, rework the tracking issues, make sure we're sharing this as well in the channel and in make posts as we've discussed. Also just summarize this meeting as well. Let's put together a summary of this meeting so we're all on the same page. Great. Well, thanks everyone. And see you around.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dan. See you everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.